It's time for Where You Live with Gene and Tony, the show that's all about owning, buying, selling, renting, and association management. If it involves a home, we'll talk about it. Here's your chance to get your homeowner questions answered. From the Concierge Landscape Studios, here's Gene and Tony.
Needed the shelter of someone's arms, and there you were.
Good morning and welcome once again to another show of Where You Live with Gene and Tony. Good morning, everyone. I'm Gene Sullivan.
And I'm Tony Crockett. What do we have on our agenda today, Gene?
We've got a lot of great stories. One piece that we're going to begin with here today was an opinion piece that we read about a week ago from this gentleman who said he lived in a homeowners association and didn't think it was all that great. And then he's outside of a homeowners association. And guess what? Life isn't all that great. He's got issues and problems. And so it's an opinion piece on life is nothing but trade-offs. So it'll be interesting. And then we want to also cover for you today an update on some of the major legislation that's taking place in Florida and Nevada. Those are two states we follow very closely. I think partially just because they've got more people than we do here in Minnesota.
Well,
but
there's a lot of condominium associations and homeowner associations, and they have both of those states have a lot of legislation being proposed and some very active anti-HOA groups.
Yes.
Makes them interesting.
It is a interesting pot of stew, yes, in those states. And so we're going to be covering what's going on there. And then we're going to also cover a story a little bit later on. There is a condominium board, I believe it's in Georgia, that is facing a recall from the homeowners. And so we want to go through that and kind of dissect that and see what's going on there. And so without further ado, why don't we go ahead then and begin with property management in the news. Property management in the news today is brought to you by Pest Control Services. When you need to get rid of unwanted pests in your home or rental property, you want to call someone who's responsive, professional, and a proud member of Angie's List. Give owner Greg Keener a call at 952-894-9748. That's Pest Control Services. Tell Greg you heard his ad right here on Where You Live. Say, Tony, would you mind reading this first opinion piece?
Will do. The headline is Trade-Offs of Doing Without an HOA. It's an opinion piece by Thomas K. Arnold and was printed in the North County Times serving San Diego. The date line is July 26th, 2011. Back when I bought my home in Carlsbad in 1994, one of my requirements was that the Arnold domicile be located outside the confines of a homeowners association. I'd lived with an HOA when I had a townhouse in Point Loma, and after 12 years of dealing with tiresome meetings, onerous restrictions, and perpetually broken jacuzzi and vicious squabbles between neighbors, all in a community with just 6 units, I swore I'd never again deal with what is essentially an extra layer of government.
Just a second here before you go on. That's very telling right there. You're talking about an association of no more than 6 units.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you agree with me that maybe there is a whole different dynamic in a homeowners association when you're dealing with less than 25, 30 people?
Yes, and too often there's more controversy, more conflict, more issues in the smaller homeowners associations, and that's because everybody is probably very invested in the community and very interested in what happens. Yeah. You start adding more and more and more homes, and people kind of get distanced from the operation.
You managed one that was like just 5 or 6 units.
I did.
Didn't you, a couple years ago?
For about 10 minutes.
For about
as a matter of fact. Well, actually, they asked me to come and make a proposal to them for management because they were having so much strife and so much conflict among themselves. And it was, I think, 6 units. So 5 of the 6 units served on the board. All right. So if they did not agree or didn't get along, nothing would happen. And the two board members who had some experience.
So there's only membership consisted of all 6, but there was one who was just a lowly homeowner and had no power, but everyone but one person had power.
And if I remember right, that one person without power was perfectly happy to be without power and usually would not even voice an opinion on any of the issues because they just wanted to stay out of the fray. But the result was it was very difficult for them to get anything done. They got really bogged down in personalities and personal issues. And ultimately, I had to say, you know what? I'm sorry. I can't do anything for you. You asked me here to take my advice and for me to share my experience, but you don't really want to hear my advice.
They didn't want to listen.
I can only go to 1 meeting a month. I can't go to 3. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to help them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different animal. But go on with the story here.
So Mr. Arnold says, 17 years after deciding he would never live in a homeowners association, I have no regrets. It took me less than 2 months to get a new balcony built, while a friend of mine with plans for a similar project is still dealing with something called an architectural review committee. An absolutely dreadful beast, I understand, is quite common in HOAs. My monthly mortgage is the same as it was back when I refinanced my home in 2002, while most of my friends are now paying a lot more than they were then because of something called an HOA fee, which appears to rise at roughly 23.7 times the rate of inflation. And there's no one to tell me where my guests can park, what color I can paint my house, and how to landscape my front yard. Hold that last thought. While I still don't want someone planting azaleas where I want bougainvilleas, can't say
we'll
that
go
word. Those flowers. All right. Ivy where I want grass and a queen palm where I want a jacaranda. The only negative to not having an HOA is that sometimes, more often than I'd like, in fact, a front yard near my house goes to hell. There are several atrocious eyesores within a mile radius of my house. A front yard gone to weed, a front yard with a brown lawn, a front yard that was once landscaped but never maintained and now looks worse than it ever did. There's nothing I can do about it, even though at times I've been tempted to pound on the door and just start screaming, "Why have you let this happen?" The only thing stopping me is the specter of seeing the door swung open by a timid little old lady whose response to my screaming is something like, "I'm so sorry. My husband died 3 years ago, and I just don't have the strength to take care of the yard myself or the money to pay someone else to do it." Of course, more likely than not, the culprit isn't a well-intentioned little old lady, but someone who just doesn't care. I've driven by numerous eyesores and watched as the front door opens and out walks a perfectly normal family, well-dressed and well-mannered, apparently oblivious to the squalid conditions of their household. How can they live like that? How can they let their place fall apart? How can they not care? It frustrates me, it angers me, and it makes me sad. Every day, it seems, when I drive to and from work, to the store, to the gym, to the beach, anywhere and everywhere in North County, I wind up passing a row of perfectly landscaped homes punctuated by a yard that's gone to hell, like a beautiful smile marred by a missing tooth. I wish there was someone I could complain to, someone who could make these misfits shape up or ship out. But I guess that's where an HOA comes in. Homeownership, like everything else in life, is nothing more than one big trade-off.
Here's a man who is a man without a country.
I guess so. But, you know, what a unique perspective. We don't hear this perspective very often, where someone will compare and contrast living within or living without a homeowners association.
Yes, I did appreciate the fact that he said, it's about trade-offs.
That's right.
And he realized that some of the things he didn't like about an association were the things that he also liked about it, too, especially when it came to things that pertain to things that agreed with him. And,
Sure.
and I think that's the bottom line, isn't it, for people living in an HOA? The only people that are ever upset are the people that don't get their way.
That seems to be true.
And, that's
most
oversimplifying
people, however,
it.
yeah, it is, but most people understand that if I want rules applied to my neighbors, I'm going to have to accept those rules applied to myself as well. Most people do understand that, although there's a few that don't.
Yeah. And, the one thing, though, that I think was probably not quite correct in his characterization is the idea that you don't live in an HOA does not mean that you don't have rules. I mean, In the city of Minneapolis, for example, I don't know that you can park a vehicle up on your lawn, take off the tires, and just let it sit there, right?
I don't think you can.
Try to have a beehive, take care of that.
Or livestock. How about the deck issue? I don't think you can just add a deck onto your home in the city of Minneapolis unless you've talked to the city about getting a permit,
You're going
correct?
to need, yes. You may be able to do it a lot easier without it being under their watchful eye.
Sure.
And I suppose that's one of the things that might be different about an HOA is that there's more of a watchful eye. Some people would say nosy neighbors.
It's more one man's watchful eye is another man's nosy neighbor.
I had that happen to me just the other day. A new neighbor who's moving in to an association was upset with some of the rules that the association had laid down about how to move in and move out in a condominium.
Yeah.
And they're concerned because they had done a lot of work on the common areas and they had things that they wanted to see taken care of. Well, she got so upset with the fact that she was being reminded, and the board just wanted to make sure that she knew what the rules were.
Sure.
She called me just to say, will you tell the board to mind their own business? And if they don't, then I'm not going to even live there.
Oh,
and so
dear.
it was too bad that
Yeah.
things were off on a wrong foot.
You know what? But people are also very upset when the rules are not explained to them, and they get a fine or they get slapped on the wrist after the fact. That is upsetting too.
Yes, it is. But I like the piece. The bottom line: life is full of trade-offs. There's people you're going to have to learn to get along with, whether it's a single-family home or a homeowners association. And if you have difficulty with your neighbors, you may want to take a look at what the constant is. It may be yourself, Well, that's property management in the news today. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we want to kind of begin to go through some of the update with the laws that are changing in both Florida and Nevada and talk about how it might pertain here in Minnesota. You're listening to Where You Live with Gene and Tony on AM 1280, The Patriot.